Welcome back to Movies in a Nutshell. Today we're talking about a thriller drama film called Nightmare Alley. It is 1939 and Stan Carlisle buries a body under the floor of an old cabin before setting it all on fire. Afterward, he wanders around the countryside for a while. Stan comes across a carnival and finds various freak shows, among them Mary Margaret Cahill, a woman who can electrocute herself. The other is a geek, a deranged man who eats a live chicken in front of the public. Clement, Clem, Hotley, and Bruno, the carnival bosses, offer Stan a job with them, and he accepts. Stan begins traveling with the carnival doing various jobs, including catching the geek whenever he escapes his cage. The first time the geek escapes, Stan hits him in self-defense, but he starts feeling bad for him and even shares a cigarette with the poor guy. One day, the carnival stops near a house belonging to Zena Crumbean and her alcoholic husband, Pete Crumbean, a couple that used to work as mentalists. They join the carnival with their act, which uses coded language and cold reading, which is kept in a book. Zena and Stan start an affair behind Pete's back. Stan eventually convinces the couple to teach him their tricks, but outside of that and his work, Stan uses his time to hang out with Molly. Stan and Molly become very close, and Stan even comes up with an idea to improve her act, which Molly adores. Bruno, who feels responsible for Molly, gives Stan the shovel talk to protect her. Stan promises not to hurt her, and later, he asks Molly to run away with him so they can have an act of their own in the city. They almost kiss, but Molly runs to her cart without an answer. That night, the geek injures his head and his fever won't come down. Clem brings Stan to help him take the geek to a homeless shelter. During dinner, Clem explains he usually acquires his geeks by finding desperate attics and alleys. Clem gives them booze, sweet-talks them, and spikes their drinks with opium. Clem mentions how he manipulates them while drugged with opium. Later, after one of their lessons, Pete begs Stan to get him a bottle from Clem's stash, and Stan complies. When Pete falls asleep, Stan takes a look at his codebook. While he was looking through it, Pete woke up. He explains the book can be misused and makes a man start to believe in his own power. When this happens, Pete mentions that people get hurt. The next morning, Pete is found dead. Days later, the police arrive at the carnival to shut it down. When they go to Molly to get her, Stan cuts in and activates the electricity as he pushes the police back, pretending he's saved their lives. Stan begins using his new cold reading skills to pretend he's in contact with the sheriff's dead mother, who asks her son to be merciful. The sheriff falls for it and agrees to leave with his men. Molly is so impressed by Stan's quick thinking skills that she finally agrees to run away with him. The two of them kiss, but before they can go further, Bruno finds them and beats up Stan. Fortunately, Molly stops Bruno, explaining that she loves Stan and will be leaving with him. In the morning, Stan gives his last goodbye to Zena, who allows him to keep Pete's book. 2 years later, Stan and Molly are a very successful psychic show among the wealthy elite of Buffalo, New York. Their show includes a blindfolded Stan guessing people's possessions using Molly's verbal cues. However, Stan can never stop dreaming about the cabin he burned down, feeling upset because the man he buried that day was his father. One night during a show, a psychologist called Dr. Lilith Ritter tries to make Stan guess what's inside her bag on his own, suspecting that Molly and Stan use a verbal code. Stan one-ups Lilith by using his code reading skills, humiliating her and telling her she was not powerful enough. Then he turns to Judge Kimball and pretends to be in contact with his dead son. After the show is over and they return to the dressing room, Molly scolds Stan for giving the man a spook when Pete warned him before that spook shows are always a bad idea. Since Kimball wants to meet them properly before leaving, Molly convinces Stan to tell Kimball the truth and offer closure. At the meeting, Kimball offers good pay if Stan comes to his house for a private consultation. Stan breaks his promise to Molly and takes the job. Lilith also stops by and leaves Stan her business card. The next day, Stan visits Lilith at her office. Stan confesses he uses tricks for his show and explains how he does it. Lilith realizes he uses elements of psychology in cold reading. Stan asks for information about Kimball's private life and Lilith accepts, stipulating that she gets to be Stan's therapist. After Lilith gives Stan personal information on Kimball, she begins asking her own questions. Lilith calls Stan out for his fear of alcohol and gets him to admit he may have killed Pete. Meanwhile, Stan and Molly's relationship begins to deteriorate. Every time Molly checks on her old friends, she admits she misses them and ends up in tears. Some of the carnival workers come to visit Stan and Molly, and at dinner, Zena reads Stan's future with her tarot cards, warning him of the danger if he does the spook show. A few days later, Stan does the spook show for the Kimballs anyway. It's a big success thanks to Lilith's information. Stan tells Kimball's wife that her dead son believes they'll reunite again someday. After the show, Stan offers Lilith half of the money. Lilith turns it down, but she eventually agrees to keep it all in her safe to hide from Molly. Stan also gives her some good news. Kimball wants Stan to do a private show for a friend. Lilith promises to look into it during her next session with Kimball. Sometime later, Lilith tells Stan what she's found out. The friend Kimball wanted to introduce to Stan used to be Lilith's patient. The friend is unpredictable, powerful, and extremely dangerous. Stan wants to do the show anyway, so Lilith tells him what she knows. When the time comes, Stan goes to a fancy building and is welcomed by bodyguard Anderson, who pats Stan down before he's finally allowed to meet Grindel, Kimball's friend. However, Grindel makes Stan sit on a lie detector in the middle of the hallway. Stan begins answering the questions, but he interrupts the interrogation by saying he's being contacted by the spirit of a dead woman called Dory, whom Grindel forced to have a miscarriage. Grindel is convinced, believing that Stan couldn't have guessed that. Still, the employees are skeptical because the machine gives out mixed results. After the show for Grindel, Stan informs Lilith of his success. Grindel wants more shows in the future, but Lilith refuses to share more information. She believes Grindel is dangerous and Lilith is the only one who knew about the miscarriage, so if Stan slips, she'll get in trouble too. While Lilith's in the bathroom, Stan makes an imprint of her keys on his notebook. Lilith returns to the office and shows Stan a scar on her abdomen, warning him again about messing with powerful people. Stan kisses her scar, and the two begin an affair. Once working hours are over, Stan returns to the office using a copy of the key he's made and accesses Lilith's recordings with Grindel. He also bribes an employee at the Department of Health to access the possessions found on Dory's body when she died, including a picture of Dory, who looks a lot like Molly. Because of the new information, Stan's next session with Grindel is also a success. However, when Grindel asks Stan to make Dory's spirit appear, Stan tries to dodge the request. Grindel pushes some extra money in his hands to make it happen. Afterward, Stan takes the money to Lilith's safe, and Lilith gets him to finally start drinking. The following day, Stan tries to convince Molly to play Dory, but she doesn't think it's a good idea. Their talk is interrupted by Anderson, who's come to pick Stan up and warn him not to harm Anderson's boss. Then Anderson takes Stan to see Grindel, who becomes furious when Stan pulls the same old message tricks. Grindel threatens Stan to make Dory appear. Stan finally convinces Molly to pretend to be Dory. While Stan gets everything ready, Molly looks at the sketches of Dory in Stan's book to get her to look right, but she's shocked to find he's been sketching Lilith as well. Meanwhile, Kimball's wife can't stop thinking about Stan's words from her son. While sharing a meal, she takes out a gun and kills her husband and then herself. Back at Molly and Stan's place, Molly has decided to leave, writing Stan a note for him to read. Stan rushes to the station to stop her, scaring Molly. At first, Molly refuses to cooperate, but Stan convinces her by promising she's allowed to leave for good after Molly helps him survive the show. When the night falls, Molly and Stan prepare at the garden Grindel built for Dory. After sending Anderson back inside, Stan starts the seance. Grindel confesses his sins to have a pure heart for Dory, saying he's hurt many women through the years to find Dory or to rid himself of his anger. After Grindel's confession, Molly appears at the end of the garden dressed as Dory. Unfortunately, the plan is ruined when Stan can't convince Grindel to stay behind to pray. Grindel runs to Molly and hugs her, but he realizes Molly isn't actually Dory. Furious, Grindel hits Molly and calls for Anderson, who's listening to the news of the Kimball's deaths on the radio. Stan kills Grindel, punching him until he's dead. Then he runs with Molly to the car as Anderson comes out and begins shooting at them. It doesn't take Anderson long to catch up with them. However, Stan hits him with a car twice before leaving. Stan brings the car to an alley and breaks its windows, and Molly is horrified at what Stan has become. She slaps him before leaving him for good. Stan goes to Lilith to get his money back and escape the city. Lilith prepares the bag with the cash for him, and after drinking a lot of alcohol, Stan tries to leave. Lilith gets him to stay by kissing him and saying she loves him. Stan becomes suspicious when Lilith turns on the recorder for his final session, so he throws the money on the floor and discovers it's all singles. The betrayal makes Stan freak out, but Lilith stays calm. She calls him delusional and points out he can't prove her involvement in his shows. Lilith is incredibly disappointed in Stan for being just another money-obsessed man. She shoots him, but the bullet only grazes his head, so Stan jumps on Lilith and tries to kill her while she's calling security. Hearing the guards are coming for him, Stan escapes the building and runs to the train station to hide inside a train carriage behind a couple of chicken cages. The train takes off. From then on, Stan travels like a hobo and remembers that day in the cabin again. It turns out Stan killed his sleeping father in cold blood. He told his father he hated him and opened the window to let his father die of hypothermia. One night after Stan exchanges his father's watch for alcohol, Stan sees a newspaper ad promoting Xena's new show. He decides to look for a job at the nearest carnival, but the boss isn't interested in his mentalist tricks. However, the boss does have another position for Stan. He's given booze, and the boss begins the geek speech that Clem told him so long ago, and Stan laughs. He accepts the job, saying he was born for it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any videos.